Welcome, everybody. Lovely to see so many people here. This evening's meeting of the Republican Labour Education Forum is looking at discussing who we should vote for and what happens next, what happens after the general election, particularly with the left of politics. So I'm not going to say any more because I'm going to hand over to Steve Freeman to give us the lead-off talk on this subject. And then obviously we want people to contribute from the floor and add to the discussion. Any questions you have, any contributions you would like to make, please, we absolutely welcome them. So I'm going to hand over now to Steve Freeman.
Yes, thank you, Carol, and thank you and welcome, comrades. We've basically got 2 more campaigning days before people cast their votes. And then we'll examine the results because we will want to understand the state of public opinion, not from the pollsters, but from what the people themselves actually do. Because until it happens, nobody really knows what's going to happen, and surprising things probably could. We intend to hold a meeting after the election, possibly next Monday or not, and maybe with some candidates who stood in the election on the left to review what we've learned from the election campaign, because there's always a lot of interesting things to be learned. Now, what I was going to do today is just review what we have been doing as the Republican Labour Education Forum during this election campaign, because we're obviously not a party and we don't have any candidates, but we have been trying to raise our political ideas in the election campaign. And so I want to briefly review quickly, and I will do that with some PowerPoints, what we've essentially been saying. And we've also sent out a paper where it begins to discuss who should you vote for in this election campaign and what should happen afterwards. So I hope we'll be able to get into that in discussion. So if I can manage to share screen. So the first thing I like to say is, where I can just press that one, like what have we been doing in the election campaign? So I've tried to summarize what we've been doing in the election campaign with these four things that different members of the forum have been doing. First of all, at the very beginning, and that's a good reference point, we issued an election leaflet, and I've got a copy of it here. Let me see it on there. An election leaflet, which says Another England Election 2024. On the back side of that leaflet, we've got basically the position we want to argue during the election campaign. And we've also, you'll see, have got a flag of 3 colours, and we've been promoting that. The idea, it's a historical flag. If you've not seen it before, most of our comrades will, but it's the green of the Levellers, the red and green of the Chartists, the green and the violet of the Suffragettes. So in a way, it represents England's struggle for democracy, historically from Levellers through the Chartist movement to the Suffragettes. But because it's tricolour, 3 colours, then it also represents a future with liberty, equality, and solidarity. So we've been promoting our flag. You will see that various points it will come up. We've also issued a manifesto. Again, I hope that comrades here will have seen the manifesto. And I will come to that in a second, just the basic thing. We've sent that out. I'm assuming that you will have seen that. It's not complete because it summarised where we got to at this particular moment in time. There are gaps in it. There are other things that we're going to review afterwards, and there'll be some amendments and so on. But we've seen it as putting down a benchmark, attempting to summarise where we are as a group in terms of our politics. And then last but not least, some of our comrades, I don't know how many of us have been doing this, but I personally have, I know Carol has, and other comrades have been engaging election activity. I've done canvassing for Jeremy Corbyn, for Andrew Feinstein, and also for Emma Dent Code. These are all London-based election campaigns. So there's individual activity where we've been supporting actual left campaigns. Now, I would start, I think, with our, well, you'll see this flag, and in a way, it's what it kind of summarizes. In two flags, it summarizes what we have been what we have been championing. On one hand, we've been supporting Palestine as we were doing before the election came up. We've also written papers on about Palestine, which is being debated in some of the left press, and it's also about England, which is represented here, about our democracy in England. And those are the two themes that are in our leaflet that we gave out. It's talking about how the struggle for democracy in Palestine and the struggle for democracy that is taking place here. And we, in our leaflet, we identified the idea that what has emerged in this election campaign is what we've called a pro-Palestinian party. I don't mean literally a party, but a whole series of candidates, and I'll come on to a minute, who have made Palestine one of their central questions in their election campaign. I include the three candidates that I visited or supported that I mentioned before. And so what we've said is what is missing, of course, is the need to make the link between that and the failure of democracy in England. And as it turns out, I'll come back to what the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign has said, but it does illustrate something that we're saying. I'll come on to that in a few minutes. So we've done this election leaflet, and so let's go back a minute because that's come down there. So the election leaflet contains three references. One is about Palestine, another one is about democracy, and we've got one at the end, free Julian Assange. And as we now know, Julian Assange was free during the election campaign, which was something which we all celebrated because we've supported Julian Assange over the whole period when he's been, well, since we've been founded as a group anyway, and many of us have been supporting him before that too. So that's.
Steve, I hate to interrupt you, but we can no longer see you. It's a black screen.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry about that. Yep. Pick me back again. There we are. That's better. Sorry, Carol. I don't know how that happened. I think I accidentally must have pressed that when it moved. Anyway. And then, of course, we were also thinking something about this movement. And we have tended to see it as a sort of proto-Republican movement. In other words, it's people coming together. It's not a socialist movement. It's not a trade union movement, but it's a kind of citizens movement. People who are concerned about the disaster and humanitarian crisis and the genocide taking place in Palestine have come onto the streets with all different kinds of politics. But they are coming as citizens who want to be active, who want to take issue with our own government about their policy towards Palestine and Gaza. And some of you have been on these demonstrations, I'm sure, will have seen this chant there, which is quite popular on the demonstration. 1, we are the people. 2, we won't be silent. 3, stop the bombing now, now, now. And that's sung regularly on the campaign. It's about a people movement. And it's about a people movement refusing to be silent in the face of what's going on. And of course, stop the bombing now, now, now. So let me then say just again, very briefly, in the manifesto we put forward, I've just summarized, we covered a whole series of things in our manifesto. Briefly, we covered how we defined what we meant by a commonwealth. We had some ideas about the formation of a new constitution called the Agreement of the People. We talked about citizenship, rule of law, Parliament for England, regional assemblies, citizens' assemblies, workplace assemblies, public ownership of land. All this is elaborated in the manifesto. And I will say also about citizens' defence, tax authorities, public information, how we'd have a democratic press, public services, health and social care and housing. That's not complete, but that's what we have in our manifesto. Somebody else is joining us.
Steve, I have put the link to our manifesto in the chat,
Oh, great! So
so
people
people can
can
actually
get the whole.
access that.
So that's a quick summary of some of the things that's being issues being covered in our manifesto. So I wanted to talk about what I think are two important features of the 2024 general election. Now, the first one is to recognise this, that the way in which the constitutional structure of the country affects what goes on, because especially in England, we have to remember that there are different elections going on. I've called nations. You wouldn't call Northern Ireland a nation, but just for the sake of the way we think about it. The election in Northern Ireland is completely different because it's a struggle between the DUP and Sinn Féin. The election in Scotland, again, the main struggle is between the Labour Party and the SNP. Although there are bit parts there for the Liberal Democrats and the Tories. But it's essentially in Scotland, essentially a battle between British unionism and Scottish nationalism, with Scottish Republicans being on the left wing of that. And we'll come on to that in discussion. In Wales, the main struggle seems to be between Welsh Labour, between the Conservatives and Labour, I think, and Liberal, between Welsh Labour and the Tories, but Plaid Cymru is an anti-unionist party, and then Welsh Republicanism on the left wing of that. So we have to think about it. We tend to assume in England that, because in England, it's a battle between Labour and Tory. But we often tend to automatically think that's the same elsewhere. So we need to remember that we've different parties in these different nations, and therefore the election is being fought out with different issues. And then the second point is we have 650 local constituency elections. There's not one election. So in every different constituency, it's difficult to say who to vote for when you know that in all these 650 elections, there's 50 constituencies, there are different combinations of parties standing and different kinds of candidates with different things. So it makes the whole thing complicated. Just to recommend who to vote for is complicated by the fact there are different kind of elections in this. And that's just the way in which our constitution works. And then I think the second important point that we've emphasized is not just that, is the nature of the epoch that we are living through at the present moment in time. And we have traced that epoch back to the year 2007-8 and the financial crisis, the banking crisis that has had such a disastrous impact on this country. And it's worth remembering that the government at that time was a Labour government. It wasn't a Tory government. So although Labour talk about the last 14 years from 2010 to 2024, we need to draw it back a bit to remember at the very beginning of this crisis, Gordon Brown was the Prime Minister and they're responsible for the situation that we had there. And part of this degeneration of our political system that we've talked about in our before is the idea that it has become a crisis of democracy. And we can think of all those moments of that crisis of democracy: the 2014 Scottish referendum, the 2016 EU referendum, the exit from the European Union after 2019, the COVID pandemic 2020-21, and now the crisis in Palestine in 2023-24. These are all aspects of showing that our democratic system is not working. One way to think about it is that our old democracy is dying. We're in a process when our old system is dying and we don't yet have a new democracy ready to be born. So we're kind of stuck in the middle somewhere. It's a bit like saying old England is dying and the new England is not ready to be born. It's saying the same thing. There's a very interesting article by Chakrabarti in The Guardian. He's a senior economics commentator. He writes in The Guardian, both fetid and gilded, Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak are two sides of the same rotten politics. And he goes on to say, after 3 days of the election campaign, it's clear that the PM, the Prime Minister, will change, but our rotten political system will not. And it's our rotten political system that we believe is so very, very central to getting ourselves out of the crisis that we are in. He says, of course, yet we enter our 5th general election since he says this summer marks the 17th summer since the collapse of Northern Rock, the start of the banking crisis. And he said that should have been the beginning of the end of Britain's ruined economic and political model, because it wasn't the beginning of the end of it. It's just simply gone on from bad to worse since the crisis of austerity. Now, what that means is that when we're looking at this election right now and trying to understand it, and I had another quote which I think is very relevant, and it comes from, and this we can understand this by imagining the epoch that we're in. Mike Small is the editor of Bella Caledonia, says, "You are not voting in a normal general election. The landscape has changed completely before your eyes. So the political realities that you have been used to all your life are just disintegrating." So this isn't a normal election. It's an election where the nature of our political system is in deep crisis, and it's not going to be fixed by either what Starmer or Sunak is doing. So I suppose, and we'll now move just on to the election. How we're doing time-wise, Carol? I'll move on quickly, and then we'll get open up for discussion. If we take the general election in 2024, well, the basic, let's have a look. The basic, in England, and I'll come back to the point, in England, the battle between Labour and Tory is basically an argument of fear versus change. Labour's proposing change, but no political or democratic change, no constitutional change, really. And fear. What are the Tories promoting in terms of fear? They're promoting the tax bombshell, they're promoting floods of immigrants, and the latest thing that they're now proposing, of course, is what they call a supermajority. If you hear the Tories speaking now, and they're speaking today, what they're saying is, if Starmer gets a supermajority, a large majority, then we'll be living in an elected dictatorship, because Starmer will be able to do anything that he wants. So don't let Starmer have a big majority. That's the last argument that the Tories are making. Fear that we are living in this elected dictatorship and the Constitution will allow Starmer to have too much power. And against that, of course, what we've been campaigning for, and what people on the left have been campaigning for, is to raise the question of Palestine, but not necessarily the question of democracy. So we're trying to run a different kind of argument in this election campaign, an alternative way of thinking about the nature of the crisis that we have. I'm going to come more or less to the end. I'm going to just now go to my last one, just to go there. I looked at the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and they've called on people to vote Palestine in 2024. And they're thinking a little bit about the democratic question. So I looked at the statement that they had, and that statement says, it was a Palestine solidarity. While politicians in this country prepare for the general election, Palestinians are facing 8 months of genocidal violence, despite 37,000 Palestinians killed by Israel. The prosecutor in the International Criminal Court seeking arrest warrants for the Israel's Prime Minister and Defense Minister, and there being a plausible case for genocide. He goes on to say, at this point, Parliament has consistently failed to reflect widespread public support for peace and Palestinian rights. So he's connecting this to our own problems of democracy here. He goes on to say, we must ensure that Palestine is a major issue at the heart of this election. And he goes on to say, he has this other point, he says here, the current genocide is built on the foundations of decades of violation of Palestinian rights by Israel, in which successive British governments have been complicit. So in here, we've got the two things that we have raised: the power of the crown, which is really what we're talking about, the power of the crown, which is by successive British governments as deployed since the Balfour Declaration in 1917-18, and the fact that our parliament is weak and consistently fails to reflect widespread public support for peace and Palestinian rights. And it actually consistently fails to support majority opinions. Majority of people would want water to be nationalised. They would want our utilities taken back into public ownership, our railways. You don't get that coming through our political system because it doesn't really reflect what is going on. So I will come to, I think my last point is, well, who to vote for? You know, who should we vote for given everything that we said here? And I think that we can just look at the structure in England. We've got this emergence of the Reform Party, right-wing populism, as it's called. We've got the centre ground between Tory or Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and they're having a campaign between fear and change. Do you want change? Or you've got the Tories going on about fear of the tax bombshell, fear of immigrants, and fear of a dictatorship if Starmer gets in. So that's where their election campaign is focused on. And then over here on this side, you have what I've called left populism, and I'll count in that people who have taken up the question of Palestine in this election. I include the Green Party, I include George Galloway's Workers' Party, I include the Trade Union Socialist Coalition, I include the group which Jeremy Corbyn, Andrew Feinstein, it's called the Collective, and then the various independent candidates all over the country who are standing up for Palestinian rights. And we're saying that we should be voting for pro-Palestinian candidates. Now, if we come to look at Scotland, for example, the situation is different because the SNP, and I'm sure Craig will tell us a little about this in a minute, the SNP has been supporting Palestine, and Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland has been supporting Palestine. And I think Plaid Cymru, but I'm not sure, has also been doing that. So these parties that don't exist in England, nevertheless, they're important parties that it would be permissible to vote for them if you're defending Palestinian rights. And all of these parties, our criticism of these parties is they're not, especially in England, they're not taking up the question of democracy and the need for democratic change, for our democratic deficit, our crisis of democracy, that needs to be resolved in some way or other. And so I would leave it there and say, we're saying, let's support these left populist groupings, depending what's in your, because it's 650 constituencies, you'd need to look in your own constituency to see what is the appropriate way. We obviously want to see the Tories, we'll be absolutely pleased as hell when the Tories are driven from office with a smaller number of seats in Parliament as they could possibly get. But we're not voting Labour, but we would say, as we said in our paper, we would vote for people like John McDonnell and other people like that on the left wing of the Labour Party who have, I'm thinking of Ian Lavery, I'm thinking of Richard Bergen and others who are actually Labour Party members who, again, have a record of supporting Palestinian rights. I think I will leave it there. After the election, what's going to come after the election? Well, we'll see on Thursday what happens. We will learn from the election what the state of public opinion, what people are actually thinking, that will come back. But I think if you even look at this left populist grouping of parties, what strikes you is how many of them are there. And sometimes they're saying more or less the same thing. It's a real dog's dinner of different organisations. And I think after the election, there ought to be one People's Party, one left populist party. And what we've been doing with our manifesto is to raise the idea that there's a different way of the left coming together in support of the idea of a commonwealth. That is to say, a democratic, secular state dedicated to the health and welfare of the people. That's how we see, and the public good. And that's what we think we need. So we hope to be, after the election, to be able to contribute to a debate of what's the way forward. And we're the only people, by the way, I'll finish on this point, we're the only people who are really raising the democratic question in this election, despite the fact we're a very small little organisation anyway. I'll finish there, Carol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. If you could stop sharing screen, that would be
Yes,
helpful.
I will do that.
Now we can see Sheila
everything.
again.
Okay, right.
That's a big. There's a ballot paper there. Thanks, Sheila. The first person to have their hand up is Mike Hope, and I'm going to bring Mike in now.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Yeah, I mean, I think that summarizes our position well. I just want to make 3 points and then raise, how I personally am challenging candidates. So the first point, you mentioned the 4 nations in this state, in the Union, which each nation needs its right to determine whether it wants to stay in this union. And you said, well, for the purposes of this, I'm going to call Northern Ireland a nation. I mean, in truth, the 4th nation is Ireland, but Ireland was divided by Britain completely artificially in 1919, I think it was. And that separation was actually one of the greatest denials of democracy that the British state has indulged in, certainly in these islands. It's done worse in other parts of the world. But it deliberately did not want a potentially hostile United Ireland on its doorstep. So it divided it into the bits which comprised primarily loyalists who would be pro-British, and which also the bits which were most productive and most profitable in terms of shipbuilding and textile industries in the north. And it's a completely artificial statelet. So right at the very heart of the British state, the mother of democracy, we have lack of democracy, democracy denied in the most extreme fashion, backed up by force. So that's the first point. Second point on this question, with the Tories scaremongering supermajority. Oh my Lord. I mean, imagine Keir Starmer as dictator. Imagine Keir Starmer as the person who would impose his horrible nightmares, nightmarish visions upon us. He would do nothing different, in fact. That is the true nightmare. This is the man who claimed recently that he has no favorite book or poem. He has no inner life. He is actually as close to a political automaton, a robot, as you can get. I mean, that's the scary thing about him. He has no vision other than the maintenance of the status quo and himself. On the question of Palestine and the democratic movement, I don't know, those people who are on the WhatsApp group that we have may have seen it. I forwarded something this afternoon. It's a doctor who was working out in Palestine as part of a group of doctors who escaped with his life because they were targeted, it seems deliberately, by the IDF. And he is raising this at a hustings with his Labour MP. And he tells the story, and he said, "I'm really angry with you. I sent details of this to you. You have not even acknowledged me." Labour MP replies, "Well, I can't respond and advocate for every individual person in my constituency. to which he's reminded that's your job. And, I mean, this just summarizes, I think, Labour in relation to this. The challenge I have for candidates is your position on Gaza and upon Palestine, the support for ceasefire, the support for the stopping of weapons from Britain, etc., etc. The challenge on the climate imperative to take a far more far-reaching action, in fact, far more far-reaching than Labour's original plan. But we need a comprehensive climate plan. And the challenge to basically refund the NHS and include social care within it along its original lines as a service for the people, free always and provided publicly. So those are the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. I'm bringing Craig in to speak.
Thank you, Carol. Yeah, sorry, I just raised my hand there when I saw nobody else was doing it, because I do understand that, today we're talking very much about who to vote for in England, but I thought it might be useful, as Steve has mentioned Scotland and Wales, if I just said a little bit about the contextual differences that he addressed. I think he's absolutely right in that the campaign in Scotland, at least if I can concentrate on Scotland, is between Scottish Labour and the SNP. There are other parties, I'll mention those in a minute, actually, which are to the left, possibly, of the SNP. I think it would be a mistake to see the SNP just as a left party. But just a bit about Scottish Labour first. Unlike in Wales, the local party in Scotland, which we tend to refer to as the branch office in Scotland of Starmer's Labour Party, they are basically fully signed up to the Starmer agenda, and they have maintained, for example, silence over the fact that this implies even further austerity than we've had in Scotland already. On Gaza, too, Scottish Labour, like Labour nationally, has ignored Palestine, decisively ignored Palestine as an election issue. That's important to bear in mind, I think, when we're deciding who to vote for. There is a difference. A lot of the left have already left the Labour Party. I think we should understand that in Scotland. They left at the time of the 2014 referendum and the Better Together campaign, where Labour and the Tories worked together to defend the Union. And that lost an awful lot of people from the left of the Labour Party at that period. There therefore hasn't been the same exit from the Scottish Labour Party that you've seen in England. So there are not great clumps of independents around in Scotland at all. So you don't have that kind of option to look at the independents, independent dissidents from Labour, if you like. There have been a number of officers from local Labour parties who've resigned over the Gaza question, over Starmer's position on Gaza, particularly in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, and Dundee. I can think of offhand. But there's no real initiative. There's no real impetus around independent candidates or anything in Scotland, I don't think. When you turn to the SNP, Steve's right. They've generally been very good on Gaza. MPs and MSPs have spoken at Gaza rallies, have been on the marches. At the All Scotland rally 2 weeks ago, when people came down from all parts of Scotland to Glasgow, Humza Yousaf, the first minister who resigned recently as part of the chaos over the abandoning of the joint agreement with the Greens, Humza Yousaf spoke passionately about Gaza. It's the best speech I've ever heard him made. It was moving. He has, through his wife anyway, he has relatives in Gaza, and he spoke, he gave examples, the most horrific examples of a relative of hers carrying her dead child to hospital and things like that, So this is the kind of thing that you wouldn't find, I don't think, in the Labour Party at all. That was from a former First Minister, if you like. The SNP are also urging that the UK should recognise Palestinian statehood, which is another, example of their position on Gaza. I think we do need to remember, though, that the SNP is a nationalist party, and although it has a reputation as being socially progressive, its economic policies have barely broken from neoliberalism over the years. There have been some sort of marginal tweakings around the edges of taxation, redistributive policies. There are also sort of important things that happened some time ago, free prescriptions and free higher education and so forth. But there are quite wide class differences within the party. My own MP, for example, a candidate for our constituency, has been on picket lines. He's supported workers' struggles for the last 12 months or so, during the strike wave. He's spoken at Gaza pro-Palestine meetings, both in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. He's also been fantastic in the constituency as well, in terms of getting involved with community initiatives like food banks and community kitchens and so forth. So, on that, next door to him, you can contrast it. There's an SNP MP there, Stuart MacDonald, who is a known careerist. He has kept completely silent over Gaza. He opposes the SNP's position, I suspect, over Gaza. He's never turned up on any workers' picket lines or anything like that. He's often absent from the constituency. He opposes the SNP position on the nuclear bases in Faslane. So is this that gives you an idea of, just in two neighboring constituencies, that contrast between the kinds of people. So it's not straightforward when we say we should support the SNP. But on the other hand, if I just make one final point, it's obvious that the SNP are in a state of chaos at the moment. The polls are showing a significant shift towards Labour. This is the result of the police investigation, Sturgeon's resignation, the collapse of the Green SNP agreement, and the mistakes that Humza made in handling that. I think all of that, plus the fact they've been in power for 14 years and have been passing on during that time cuts from Westminster, which of course they argue they have to do that they don't have the reserve powers not to do that. There are some signs recently that things are beginning to steady a bit. But there is no doubt that Labour are going to make big gains in Scotland. And one of the things we have to bear in mind there is that even if they don't make enormous gains, if they achieve a majority of seats for the first time in many years in a Westminster election, this will be spun as the end of the independence campaign. Now, I know that the independence still in Scotland is running 50-50. The fact that the SNP are losing support, it might come as a surprise to comrades in England. The support for independence is still maintained at, virtually half and half. What will happen if there is a significant shift towards Labour is it will make it increasingly difficult for the independence campaign, and therefore those of us on the left of that campaign who are Republicans, it will make it that much more difficult to build the impetus. It's been bad enough trying to get the SNP to take it seriously over the last 10 years since the independence referendum, but actually with any Labour victory will be milked to try to undermine the independence campaign. So I think Steve's right, just in short, to say that it is worth a vote for them. And we are saying this, that it's worth voting for the SNP. There are alternatives. The Greens are to the left, I think, of the English Greens. They're not part of the same party as the English Greens. They're an open eco-socialist party. They call themselves an eco-socialist party. There is ALBA, of course, which is socially reactionary, but economically perhaps slightly more progressive in some respects, but they have very small support. Tusk and the Workers' Party both are standing in some constituencies, but not all. And we also have the Scottish Socialist Party, which is the remnants of the Scottish Socialist Party that we had, at the time of devolution, before the debacle around Tommy Sheridan that some comrades may have heard about. They're also standing in the elections. They're standing primarily on an economic slogan of "for the millions, not the millionaires." They claim to be Republicans. They probably are Republicans, but it's the kind of republicanism that shifts, is shifted into the future, some vague time in the future, and they agitate right around primarily economic aims at the moment. Sorry, I've just taken up too much time, I think, but I just thought it was worth mentioning that because Steve did talk about the four nations. I wanted to just emphasize how different it can be up here and the different choices we may have to make when we come to think of who to vote for.
Yeah, thank you, Craig. I mean, that's why I gave you a bit more time. I'm trying to keep contributions from the floor to 3 minutes, but you were giving us a very full explanation of what's happening in Scotland. So I thought that warranted a little bit more time. But from now on, it's going to be 3 minutes per contribution. So I'm going to bring in Richard Sampson now.
Hi, thank you, Carol. I'll be 30 seconds. I'm speaking from abroad. I don't live in the UK. I'm originally from Wales. I must correct Craig. The Green Party is not the Green Party of England. It's the Green Party of England and Wales. Minor point, but as you were talking about the four nations and chose to mention it, it's worth mentioning it precisely. The only point I wanted to make is that the SNP has no members in the House of Lords in Westminster, and that hasn't been mentioned as far as I can tell, and I think that's a very good sign of a reforming spirit. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Richard. Very, very short, very short. Thank you. I'm bringing in Peter Grant now.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. A few things sprung to mind, to be honest. And the first and most important one for me is that in my 40, 50 year experience of British politics and general elections, that we've always been told as trade unionists that we needed to vote Labour even if we had to put a peg on our nose, because Labour was the party of the working class. And I think that now that in this election has become completely untenable because of what's happening in Palestine and Gaza. How on earth we can be told to vote for a party that supports genocide is beyond the pale for me. And any Labour representative that is standing for election that does not support the Palestinians doesn't deserve any vote at all. And I think the slogan of that was put out around the ceasefire of ceasefire or no vote is absolutely spot on. And I think that has to be our attitude to when we're looking at who we recommend for voting. The other thing is obviously we have to talk about the what's going to happen after the election. I mean, it's a foregone conclusion that Labour is going to win, but what happens afterwards? And I think one of the issues that will come up quite fast is the trade union legislation and the fact that they've promised this workers' charter within 100 days of the election. And I think they'll be wiggling themselves. They've already tried to water it down as much as possible. Sharon Graham has had a wobble with them over it. But I think that the trouble will brew quite fast after they got elected, because I don't think they have much intentions of bringing much of this workers' charter in. There'll be some crumbs off the table, but that's about it. And I think that is going to cause major problems for the trade union bureaucracies to keep their members on side if Labour does junk that policy. What another issue is, I mean, I've got, I'm lucky really. I've got Cat Smith, who's the MP in this area in Lancaster, and she's had an excellent position on Palestine, and she's also been a full supporter of Jeremy Corbyn as well. And obviously, somebody like that, I will vote for her. But despite the fact that she's in Labour and she's in a party which is a problem, and she's in a party that's supporting genocide. I only hope that these brown envelopes with the arrest warrants floating about in them actually come round Starmer's gaff and a few more streeting and all the rest of the horrible buggers that are in the Labour Party, because they all want putting in front of a court, and they all want putting in jail, the whole lot of them, for what they're doing. And I just raised this issue as well. What about what's going to happen in November, where Trump looks like he could possibly win back the presidency of the United States, and what that will mean for British government foreign policy and the relationship that they always have with the United States president. I don't think Starmer would have any difficulties talking to Trump, but Trump might have difficulties talking to him. I don't know whether they'll manage to sort it all out at a bilateral commission or whatever nasty little group they get involved with. But anyway, those are the issues that I see we need to talk about. Thanks, Carol.
Thanks very much, Peter. What I'm going to do now is to go back to Steve for some concluding remarks. If any of you want to write a question in the chat, that's absolutely fine. And then I will read the question out and Sheila will be able to translate for us. So if you want to write a question in the chat, then please do so and I will read it out for Sheila to translate into BSL. So don't be frightened. Don't be frightened to do that. We really want to hear from as many people as possible. We need your opinions. We need your input into this whole situation. Very important. Of course, we've got the general election in a few days, and this is a really, really important topic. So I'm going to go back to Steve now.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. Yes, Sheila.
Okay. My MP is Clive Efford. Clive Efford from Labour currently. I mean, Greenwich is a very safe, Greenwich is a very safe Labour seat. What's his position? How did he vote on Palestine and other issues? Do you know?
Steve, can you help us there?
I'm afraid I can't, but you're asking the right question. It's just that I can't give you the right answer to that. But the question, I think what we're advising people to do, obviously, the point when I said we got 650 local elections, we got 650 elections going on, and we know very little as a small organisation what's going on in the vast bulk of those 650 elections, right? So we don't know that. There are lists out there of other people on the left who've suggested people to support in different elections. So there is information out there about good people, but essentially what you need to do is to, as it were, with those principles and ideas, apply it in your local constituency. So you're asking the right question, but I don't have the right answer for you. I mean, he could have a very bad record. I wouldn't vote for him. If he had a good record, I'd say, well, he's certainly permissible. But you might have another pro-Palestinian candidate who's better, or you may have a Green candidate who's also very good. I can't say that. I think that's in a way something that you're just going to have to kind of check out. I'll see if we can find out anything afterwards, but I don't have an answer right now, that's for sure. But it's the same thing. All we have said in our list is that these parties have shown some evidence of being pro-Palestinian. It doesn't mean we vote for these parties. It just means that we could choose from this list of parties, be in your local constituency, whoever it is in your constituency, because you wouldn't have SNP, Plaid, or Sinn Féin anywhere in England, obviously. But if you're in Scotland, you could look at those, and they're not ruled out in what we're saying. So we're not ruling stuff out, but we're really saying, check out. And it takes me to Peter's question at the end. Yes, Cat Smith, I think, has a good record, and it's quite permissible. I think Carol's going to vote for Ian Lavery, probably John McDonnell and others that we mentioned who are Labour Party members, but they've got to have shown their mettle in some way. So you're clear that that's what they've done. And this is what the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign is urging us to do anyway. I mean, we were saying this before, but they've confirmed that's what they want us to do. So we're not going out on any limb here by doing this. We just have to investigate in each constituency who the best person to vote is, and it may be difficult in some of those. But we may as socialists not like George Galloway's Workers' Party. We might not like George Galloway. We might not like Tusk. But really, we mustn't get into those particular things for this election. If they're the best Palestinian, pro-Palestinian, if they're raising that issue, trying to put it onto the election agenda, which the main parties do not wish to discuss and are not discussing. There's a blackout, so we don't discuss this as an election issue at all, and none of them are. Labour mentioned that they might recognise a Palestinian state, but when you read the fine print, it means, in 100 years' time or something, or after various hurdles that have been jumped that will never be jumped. So they're just doing it to try to hope they can keep some Muslim voters on board. They're doing that, but that's not serious at all. So going back to what Mike said, I completely agree, Mike. I didn't mean to imply Northern Ireland as a nation. I did say it wasn't, I think, when I was speaking, but obviously it's part of the Irish nation. There is no, I don't think, any Northern Irish identity as such. I think people in Northern Ireland are either British or Irish in their identities, and they see it in that way. And as you're right, this is the first most well played out example of unionism and the damage that it does, which is why we're an anti-unionist in the way we conduct our politics. I wanted to add something just about this supermajority, which doesn't make any sense here, but you may remember that the Conservative Lord Hailsham spoke about our constitution was like an elected dictatorship. What that meant was that if anybody got a real control of Parliament, the Crown could then literally impose anything there are no real checks and balances in our constitution. It's a bit rich for the Tories to complain about Labour having an 80-seat majority or whatever number it is when they've had it and they've abused it and they've shown that there is no checks on them when they tried to prorogue Parliament. Parliament didn't stop that. Parliament's not stopped anything at all because it's so weak and it will continue to be weak, which is why we're talking about a new Parliament, not the rotten one that we've got. So we're living in a dangerous times because our constitution gives it's not the super majority, it's the superpowers that the Crown has, which ministers and using secondary legislation can impose upon this country. And I would say that. On Scotland, I agreed. On Richard, I also agree. Scotland is unicameral. I don't think if Scotland did become independent, I cannot see them inventing a House of Lords. Even though they don't send anybody there, they won't invent their own House of Lords. I don't think. But anyway, and I think Peter's point's true. For the trade union movement, I personally think if Starmer has 100-seat, 200-seat majority, we'll be imagining that he'll be here for the whole of 4 or 5 years. But I think the crisis, what I've tried to say in the analysis, the crisis is so deep that he will find there will be all sorts of problems. I mean, Johnson in 2019 won an 80-seat majority, and yet he was out of office within 2 years. And we've had about 5 or 6, I haven't counted it properly, Tory prime ministers since Cameron. So I think the crisis is such is that Starmer won't prove to be the stable. It won't be proved to be the stable government. And Peter's maybe right to say that trade union legislation might be one of the things, and the doctors' pay dispute and various other things that they will have to confront as soon as they're in office. And of course, Trump will make that. And what I would say, final thing, unless other people got their hands up, and Chris will carry on. But the two things that we're looking for, comrades, is will you endorse the flag? If you will endorse our flag, that's very good. And will you endorse or support our manifesto? We're looking for, if you can do that, that's really what we want to do. So please get in contact with us afterwards if you've seen our manifesto and you want to give support for it, so we can gain some strength and interest as we're going through that. So I'd urge you to do that. That's how you can support what we're doing, and consider joining with us and in the period after the election.
If I can just say to Sheila, what's the name of your MP again?
Clive Efford.
Clive
Efford, EFFORD.
Well, he's never been in the Socialist Campaign Group. In the Labour Party, there's a Socialist Campaign Group of MPs. People like Richard Bergen, Ian Lavery, and Diane.
Yeah.
It was, of course, Jeremy Corbyn as well. He's never been in that particular organisation within Labour. He's never been in the Socialist Campaign Group. So I would say, I don't know his voting record. Richard Sampson told us that you can look up MPs' voting records on They Work For Us website. So you can look up his voting record. But from what I know, he's not part of the Socialist Campaign Group. And so I probably wouldn't vote for him if that's the case. But it's up to you to decide, of course. And you could have They Work For Us website and find out what his voting record is on that issue. I'm going to bring
Carol. Sorry, Carol. Can I googled Clive Efford a few minutes ago.
Oh, thank you.
Can I just say something very briefly for Sheila?
Yeah, I'll bring
he was shadow. He's actually been MP for Eltham and Chislehurst. Yeah, not Greenwich. That's somebody else. But he was Shadow Minister for Sport from 2010 until 2016. He's very proud to represent Labour. He goes on a lot about campaigning for local bus services, and is proud to have raised his children in the area. He goes out of his way to say nothing contentious even about the cost of living and the difficulties workers have, let alone about trade union rights, the NHS, or indeed Gaza. So I would say avoid.
Thanks, Mike, very much for Googling him in the meantime. Thank you. I've got 3 hands, so we really are going to have to stick to 3 minutes. John Fitzgerald.
Yeah, hi all. Yeah, you probably know. Well, you don't know this particular issue, but I live in Brighton in Kent Town, and our MP Russell Lloyd Moy, he was suspended, 2 days after the election began. And he's a, progressive MP, he's part of the campaign group and so on, and supported Corbyn. He's still telling members and constituents to vote Labour, even though he's been suspended. And the person they're parachuted in is Chris Ward, who is a well-known right-winger and a supporter of Starmer. So we've been put in a position really where, on the one hand, we've got Russell Moyle telling us to still vote Labour, and on the other hand, we've got the Green Party. We haven't got Tusk. I think if we had Tusk, I may vote Tusk, but the Green Party, and they seem to be now those who are going to. Labour's still going to win. I would think. But it could split the vote for Labour, and it could let a Conservative in. So, a bit concerned about that, but I still think it's right to vote Green, because that's the only party as such that is, as far as I'm concerned, right on the Palestinian issue. There's some talk earlier about the fact that what is the Labour Party's actual position on a ceasefire? It seems to, I never seem to be able to actually, work it out. It's all over the place. So I'm going to vote Green. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, John. That's a very good question. What is the Labour Party's position on a ceasefire? I think a lot of us would want to know what that is. I'm bringing in Richard Chilvers now.
Some of the speakers have obviously are in constituencies where, in fact, the electoral process is fairly straightforward in the sense that, in fact, if they have left MPs, whether the social campaign group, which I feel that actually, although we should vote for them, have actually failed the test of time, to be honest, in terms of backing Corbyn up. The red lines, they've to be honest, but on lots of issues, they were obviously on their side. But I think a degree of cowardice within that group, really, and that hadn't actually taken up the real struggle, really, which could have taken place some time ago with enough campaign, put pressure on the Starmer Labour Party right, who was opposing all support for the strikes during that time, including the ones in the NHS, which should never have been, the doctors really and the nurses should never have been allowed to go on strike. Not in the sense that they're right, but the TUC should have said, this is a red line with the government, that in fact that they should have taken up on behalf of the NHS, should not put in a position of health workers having to withdraw their labour. And it's something that the whole movement should have actually stood ground on. So that's irrespective of that. But thirdly, I am a bit worried about the four nations concept, because I tend to think, and I come from a kind of a peace news, more non-violent revolutionary angle, slightly more anarchist, as you can say, is in the sense that, in fact, the House of Lords would have to be got rid of, and the House of Lords could be rejigged as an organisation which could be tied in with regional assemblies and citizens' assemblies, so that we have a democratic engagement structure throughout the three nations. Because I would agree with Mike. I don't think we should include Ireland in that category, although Northern Ireland could be part of what I could see a decentralisation of citizens' assembly and that kind of thing. But we have a problem in ours. I think the electoral strategy is not irrelevant in some of ours. I mean, our one is very considerable, where we've got a sitting MP, we've got a Green Party was purely a paper candidate, really, because although very much concerned with getting the Waveney MP into power, which is more than likely he might get in. But here we've got really basically somebody who was parachuted in against the will of the Labour Party. And I've got a feeling there are some people in the Labour Party who won't be even voting Labour because of the candidate being foisted on them. So the question is whether you vote at all, to be honest, or whether in fact you just none of the above or something like that. So that's because you can't vote Labour and you can't vote Tory. And the Green one is purely a paper candidate. It's purely a. So the question is, if you want to make a proper protest, you either, I suppose, you could vote Green as a protest, or you just rubbish your do none of the above. So that's an issue, really. I just think the electoral, but there are critical areas, there are critical electoral things that are taking place, and let's hope that the left do win out. Let's hope Corbyn wins out in otherwise I think the left is going to be very, very weak in Parliament. Very, very weak in Parliament. Yes, there will be some Green MPs, but Green MPs, they're not based on the trade union movement. They're not based on organised labour. They're based on a much more bigger constituency, which is far wider than that. So, I mean, that's just my contribution, really. I'm a bit concerned about Four Nations because I think that we need to maintain that kind of, we might maintain a kind of a unity of the peoples across that. Thank you very much. Thank you
very much, Richard. I'm going to bring Phil Vellender in and then Richard Sampson.
Hi there. Okay. I'm just trying to get rid of my hand. Right. Okay. Yeah, I wanted just to say a couple of things about Starmer, if I may. I was going to refer, as Steve's mentioned, Chakravarti's article in The Guardian. I wanted to raise another one. It's by a professor from King's College, London, who is called David Edgerton, and it was published last Friday. I think it's a useful article for everyone to have a look at. And the reason for that is that, one of the reasons is that Starmer is interested in wealth creation and growth, but he's not interested in redistribution. And this is a fundamental factor. He's not looking to make a big shift in wealth, in the wealth gap between rich and poor. Hence, the two-child cap is not being removed. He also, this is the professor, his name is Edgerton. He says the most telling feature is that the Labour Party's fundamental criticism is on their lack of competence rather than their policies. So he's saying that Labour is now positioned to become the new Conservative Party. That is what it wants to do. It wants to make the Conservatives unelectable because it occupies their entire spectrum of politics. And unfortunately, many in the Labour Party still believe that Labour is a progressive party. This is entirely erroneous. But because Starmer has unsaid his promises in various different contexts, it has been very difficult to gather them together in a synthetic fashion, i.e. put into one place, and then say, 2016, he said blah, and then, I mean, I know individuals have done this, but there's been no systematic debunking of Starmer's lies so far. And I think I don't want to say, obviously, I've only got 3 minutes, but I think it's important to believe Starmer, as Edgerton says, believe Starmer at his word. And he says they are the party of wealth creation. They have no ambition beyond continuing what the Tories have done. They're not going to threaten the very richest. So what then that takes us to is what happens afterwards. And there are two views on this. Well, first thing is, what happened before? I think there will be gross number of abstentionists. People will not go to the polls. They will just say, I mean, if you look at the talking heads on the TV, they're all saying things like, oh, I don't know, they're both, I can't tell the difference, and that sort of thing. So I think there's a very low expectation. A lot of people want the Tories out, but a lot of them can't see the point of doing it with Starmer. So what my big fear is and there are two views on this as well, is that Farage will dispense with a lot of the Tories if he gets some seats in the Commons. He's made it clear that he's coming after Labour next, and that means going back and relitigating the Brexit debate within the Red Wall and that area of the country. He wants to reignite the Leave movement. That's his aim. But use that movement this time or next time in 5 years to attack Starmer and the Labour Party. That will be his next objective. On the other hand, Starmer's objective is to unite the party if things are going wrong and wheels are coming off the wagon, and say Labour's enemy is reform. And they will make that the new Conservative enemy and try and pitch themselves to the left of reform, which they might even pull that off, because who knows, they may have shifted so far to the left that they make reform look decidedly centrist. I'll leave you with that.
Did you mean it? Did you mean?
Thank you very much, Phil. I've got Richard and then Sikandra. So Richard.
So I wanted to go back to something the other Richard said, and you said, Carol, you were talking about the campaign group. The campaign group has never failed to disappoint. So I was really waiting for them to do something. They've had countless opportunities to do something, but they've shown that loyal to the Labour Party, either because they believe it's like the communists used to, that it's a way of life, you can't leave, and that the only way they'll leave is if they're thrown out. And I understand that. And I only left because I was thrown out last year. But having been thrown out, I'm now happy to speak against the Labour Party. And I think, as I said, I expected the campaign group, and I expected Jeremy Corbyn to step forward at some stage over the past 2 years, and they haven't done. And it's either cowardice or it's blatant self-interest, that they prefer to be a neutered left-wing MP rather than a vociferous ex-MP. And the only one I know that hasn't taken that line, although it wasn't in recent times, is George Galloway, who I don't agree with about a lot of what he says, but at least he has the courage of his own convictions to become not an MP for a time. The actual lowest point for me over the past few years of seeing how useless the campaign group was when John McDonnell was accepted an invitation to speak at a Stop the War rally, and he was told by the party that if he spoke at the rally, he'd no longer be a Labour MP. So he declined their invitation. I mean, this is gutless, spineless, useless, and shameful. And I understand it. They can speak nicely on occasion. Ian Lavery speaks nicely. Sarah Sultana speaks nicely. But at the end of the day, they just fall into line, and they'll fall into line behind this shameful right-wing Labour leadership. So that, the Labour Party cannot be the place to go anymore. And the reason I stayed in, because I knew this for a long time, the reason I stayed in was because I felt that my group, my affinity group, if you like, on the left, was the rightful inheritor of the Labour Party. And I believe that maybe the Labour Party will come back to the left sometime in the future. But in its current version of the Labour Party is an enemy of the working class, an enemy of redistribution, as has been said, an enemy of social justice, international justice. And I could go on and on and on, but I'm not going to. Thank you, Carol. I
have to say, Richard, I totally agree with you. The Socialist Campaign Group has been an utter disappointment. I absolutely go along with what you're saying. Now there was Sikandra. Sikandra, I'm bringing you in now.
Go on. Hi. Fine. Yeah. Are you Right. Sikandra wants to know about Reform Party. So who are they? What are they? Are they good?
Right. I'm going to leave that one. I'm not going to say anything. I don't, as a chair, it's not my job, but I'll come back to Steve on that. Steve, over to you.
Okay, hold on a second on that one.
Anyone else
Okay.
wants to talk about the Reform Party?
Yeah, okay. I mean, what I would say is that there are right-wing populist parties across Europe. They're growing in France, they're growing all over Europe. And Reform is our version of a right-wing populist party. When I say populist, I mean that they appeal to the people and basically say that the ruling elites have sold out the people. And you need to vote for us because we're going to represent the people. But then they immediately begin dividing the people by starting to argue about this, to raise questions such as racism and all sorts of prejudices and things that divide people. And they try to mobilize right-wing opinion into a party because they know the Conservative Party, they are like the Tories on steroids, I think I would call them. That's the Tories on steroids, the extreme Tories. I think it's what they really are. But I let other comrades come in and add to that if they want to do that.
Well, I was on a.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
I was on a Twitter feed which showed the rally, Nigel Farage's rally for the Reform Party in Birmingham, and the camera panned back, and there were about 4,000 people there. In a hall, and the kind of hand movements that Nigel Farage was slightly reminiscent of the kind of hand movements and postures that Hitler used back in the 30s. And there were people in the thread, I mean, it wasn't me, but there were people in the thread saying that this was, they put pictures up of the Nuremberg rallies in the 30s. So there are people out there, Sikandra, who actually think that the Nigel Farage is a fascist. Now, I don't personally think he is a fascist. I think he's just a right-wing populist. But I see the threat from the far right as just that, a threat. So I definitely would not recommend the Reform Party, but it's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. Excellent question. I've got Peter and Phil wanting to come back in. So I will bring Peter first of all, Peter Grant, and then Phil.
I was just going to reply on that about Farage. I don't quite agree with.
Sikandra is signing to us.
No. She's the community. Carry on. She's talking to Lenka. Lenka is just clarifying her, a few bits and pieces. Okay. Sorry, it's just deaf community. This is, a concept of, understanding, which I think is brilliant. That I would get this part of deaf community, which is going to go out to another deaf community, and we're going to spread the word. Hopefully.
Oh, excellent! Thank you very much. I didn't want to butt in if she wanted to talk. Okay.
No. If it does happen, I will, ask.
Peter, do carry on.
Yes. Sorry. I was just going to say that, in my view, Farage and Reform have got all the makings of a fascist group. The people that they have in leadership have had brushes with membership of the BNP and the English Defence League and all the rest of it. And if you go into France, with what's happened in France actually now, you've got Le Pen, whose dad was really famous for his anti-Semitism and love of dear Adolf. That even though they've done their best to mask it, you can see from what they're putting forward that they are stirring up division for the very reason that the Nazis stirred up division, and that is that they do have a fascist outlook. That's what they are. They're ex-Nazis, and they are different to Trump, because Trump really doesn't have that sort of political understanding that Le Pen has. But these parties in Europe, it is very worrying that they are actually gaining power, and we ignore them and ridicule them at our peril.
I would agree, Peter. I'm going to bring in Phil and then Richard again. Phil?
Yeah, I just want to say about that Birmingham meeting, Carol. I'll take it a little bit more precisely, if I may. The symbolism, iconography, in other words, the imagery of it, was directly linked to Goebbels' speech after the defeat at Stalingrad in 1943, when he demands of the delegates from the chosen delegates from the Nazi Party in the hall, do they want total war? And the intonation of the voice is identical. It's as if Nigel Farage has copied. It's a kind of call and response. And the same as Goebbels, he asked three questions. Do you want, do you want, do you want? So I don't think there's any doubt that he has, I mean, the whole way he entered that hall, I don't know if you saw that, the shining fountains of sparkling light. It was very, very reminiscent of a Nazi Nuremberg rally, but more specifically, as I say, about Goebbels, because what that is really is he's preparing the ground for when he goes bigger, because that's his goal. He's got 60,000 signed up members, he claims. And if he goes bigger, his real aim is to get to 250,000 signed up members. And it's a funny sort of thing because, of course, he calls it a company still. And he owns the company. So you can ask yourselves where the money is going. And we know Hitler swallowed a lot of the cash from the Nazi Party. But that was just what I wanted to say. I think also another piece of news is it's worth remembering these right-wing parties do fracture like anyone else does. And Meloni now in Italy is suffering from a gross embarrassment of her young members were meeting and they were really singing Mussolini anti-Semitic songs, and they were recorded on tape doing this. So this has caused Meloni no little bit of embarrassment. And we must remember that in where I live in Thanet, when the right UKIP took over the council, they didn't do anything. They didn't turn up. They didn't do it. Now, that doesn't mean you discount them, but the track record of them actually when they are elected into positions in councils is pretty dismal. They don't actually do anything because behind this rhetoric, they don't have developed answers and policies to specific problems. There's few of them that have got the political experience to actually do the dirty work of constituency work. That is hard slog. And a lot of them aren't interested in that. I'm not saying we should ignore them, of course. I'm just pointing out that they do have specific goals, which do not necessarily include doing anything to do with the sort of work of the current MPs do. They're more interested in being there, occupying the space, and then hopefully people ignore the fact they have no other policies and hating immigration, wanting mass blocking immigration, hating on people from other cultures and religions and so on. And of course, when they say that they are anti-Muslim, what they prove again and again, and this was proved at Warwick University, where members of the Conservative Students Association were recorded singing the Nazi Hearst Wessel last week, they ultimately aim their fire on the Jews. That's who their eternal enemy remains.
Oh my goodness, Phil, that is really very, very worrying indeed. Wow.
You don't pay me to cheer you up.
No. No, well, you certainly haven't done that, Phil. I've got John Fitzgerald, and we've actually gone beyond our 90 minutes now. So, John, can I ask you to be very, very brief, please?
Yes. I think we have to be very wary of the relationship of Farage and Trump. The idea that Trump doesn't know what's actually going on in terms of our politics, I think is, we have to be very careful. It was Trump who encouraged Farage to allow Boris Johnson to become Prime Minister. They are well in with each other. So, we have to be very wary as to that link. And of course, what fascism or what these parties do, these nationalist parties, is to begin with, is to appeal to the middle class, of course. And if you look at Farage's so-called, he doesn't call it a manifesto, he calls it contract. If you look at his contract, of course, it is a very good contract for the middle class. Yeah.
Thanks very much, John. I've got one more hand up. Richard, again, can I ask you, Richard, please, to be very, very brief as we're over our 90 minutes now. So, Richard, could you put your video on so I can spotlight you, please?
Yeah, just coming back to what Phil says about the working class and what we have to will be confronting in the new parliament in terms of the trade union movement of the Labour government. I mean, to be honest, it's not just a campaign group, but a lot of the trade unions have been very complicit in support for Starmer, and particularly Unite, Sharon Graham. I mean, but she hasn't signed off, and I think, to be honest, she's tried to play the long game in a way. She's sacrificed the Palestinian people in a way to her main aim, which is to make sure that, in fact, this new employment bill comes through via Starmer. But I've got a feeling that, in fact, that she's going to. I mean, although yes, she hasn't signed off, and it's another pressure point on them. I mean, I don't think. Well, I'll wait and see. I don't think he's going to rescind all the legislation, particularly the minority, the ban on strikes. To be honest, I mean, we'll wait and see, but I don't think he will. And 0 hours contracts, hire and fire, all those things go in contradiction to what he wants to do, which is to please big business who want growth and basically exploitation. They want to keep it as it is and make it worse. I mean, it's very close to what Sunak wanted, really, and what is in terms of the gig economy, the neoliberal model, where in fact trade unions are less and less important. So we'll wait and see, because that is the confrontation, and whether then, of course, that puts on to the point when there is this kind of conflict with the Labour government. How will the Socialist Campaign Group play it then? Will they walk stand the line or not? But we'll wait and see, because there will be some. They'll still maintain. There'll still be some left MPs under that grouping. Will still be in Parliament, but there may be less. But we'll see. So that's just. I just thought I'd just add that really to that in terms of the argument. Really, I think we'll find out fairly soon, to be honest.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'm going to bring Steve back in now for some concluding remarks.
Yes, look, comrades, we had a long session now. I don't think there's been some really good contributions to this discussion. I'm very pleased with that. I want to say a couple of things just at the end here. I believe after the 4th of July, after the election results come in and we see what's happened, I think it will confirm to us that our democracy is in a crisis. And I think that one of the measures of that will be how many people vote and how they vote. And so there will be a lot of analysis of the health of our democratic system. And I believe that there will need to be a new party of the left. And I believe that that party, the key thing for that party is what kind of program should it stand upon? Should it make democracy one of its key tasks? And currently the left in England is not that interested in democratic questions at all. It maybe thinks PR would be a good idea, but that's about the sum total of it. So I think that what we want to do as a Republican Labour Education Forum is to intervene in that discussion and make some positive proposals about what sort of program the left needs if it's going to go forward in a country which is in a state of degeneration, where our constitution is crumbling before our eyes and doesn't really exist anyway, and our political institutions, the House of Commons, House of Lords, they all fail. They're all failing. So there needs to be almost, if we put it this way, a democratic revolution, a radical democratic change, without which we are stuck in a kind of time warp that we can't get out of. I'd be interested, Phil, to look at David Edgerton's analysis. I think it would be good. There's a bit of a discussion about what is the distinction, I think, between a fascist party and a left populist party, because I do think there's a difference. I think Trump was a right populist party in fascism. I think Trump was a right populist, but once he set about trying to overthrow the American Constitution after the previous election, I think he's gone close into fascism. That's what. So a right populist movement is the basis really for a fascist movement. The thing about a fascist movement wants to end liberal democracy and suppress the trade union movement. It's not clear that any of the big corporations yet want to go that far. I don't feel necessarily threatened by that. Right populism suits them. I agree with what John said about Brighton. I think Lloyd Russell Moore, he used to appear as a kind of quite a good left winger, but I think he's shown that he's a careerist. He's going to back Labour because he wants to he wants to become another Labour MP again. So I really wouldn't have much time for him at all. I think the key thing, really, I come back to this, is to follow the logic of trying to find out if there's a pro-Palestinian candidate that you can support in this election. I think that's the most important thing to do. And if you can endorse our manifesto or support our flag, that would be really good, because that will put you in a good position for what comes after the election. So I would urge you to do that if you haven't done that already. I think that's all really, Carol. Oh, yeah, there's a discussion to be had with Richard about unionism, but I'm not going to try and enter that discussion right now. About what we believe is that the union should be dissolved in order to become a democratic form between free nations can form themselves into a federation, but they can't have a federation imposed upon them. They've got to become sovereign nations first, as a first step. And Mark said that about Ireland. Ireland must become independent, and then maybe after they become independent, we can form a new federal structure voluntarily between freely consenting nations. You know, like the idea, if you're in an abusive marriage, the marriage must be dissolved, and then it's up to you whether you get married again or go in a different direction altogether. That's up to you, but you must be free of that abusive marriage or that abusive relationship.
Thank you very much, Steve. Phil's put his hand up again, so sorry, Phil, do you want to speak?
Very quickly. Trump has got a plan for fascism. It's called 2025. It's been put about quite widely in America. It's written up and produced, ready to go. And secondly, the Supreme Court, 6 votes to 3, have kicked his January the 6th trial down the road, and it will not be tried before the November 4th election, and it will be put into a lower court again. Answer: Trump has got away with it. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Oh my.
Sorry, more good news.
More good news, Phil. Gosh. Sorry. My goodness. Okay, thanks very much, Phil. Well, I don't know whether I want to say thank you or not. Very depressing news. So we're way over time now, way over our normal 90 minutes. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to thank everyone who's attended this meeting. It's been a wonderful discussion. I want to thank Steve particularly for the lead off he gave us. And I'm going to say good night to everybody now, and thanks for coming.
And finally, remind everybody to endorse our manifesto, Carol. Don't forget that one.
Manifesto, yes.
Yeah, again.
Manifesto, yes. Yeah. Please do say, please read our manifesto, and let us know if you could support it or not. Please let us know. It's in the chat, and we can send it out to you. We can send it out to you as well if we get your email addresses. So please do let us know if you support our manifesto. It's a really democratic plan for a democratic England. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you to Steve, and thank you to everybody who's asked questions and contributed. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and bye.